I'm a member of the Apprenticeship Hub Network, and that is a group of apprenticeship hubs scattered across the country. There's 7 of us at the moment, but always growing. And our aim is to engage more employers in apprenticeships. And we are often asked by different employers about all different subjects, but this is one that has come up on several occasions, certainly for me, and I know for other members of the group, that, you know, how do employers engage with young people, anyone actually, that is neurodiverse? What can they do to make it easier to engage with people and actually smooth the pathway a little bit? So the Apprenticeship Hub Network got together and engaged with this wonderful organisation, Genius Within, and they agreed that they would help provide some guidance, some support, some hints and tips for all of us, hopefully, to make that interaction easier, simpler, nicer for everyone, which is what we're all about. So I just wanted to welcome you all, but on behalf of the Apprenticeship Hub Network, we're really pleased that the reaction we've got to this, and hope there'll be many more. And at that point, I will hand over to Martina and let her take us through the morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Jodie. I would like to introduce my colleague, Royston, who's
Morning.
Who's in charge of like technical stuff, it'll be my turn first, and then Royston will be talking with you. So what I'd like to do is just jump into the presentation that Royston's actually created, because he's amazing like that. And so by all means, feel free to keep using the chat box. If you've got any questions as we go through the presentation, please just ask them as we go along, because you might not be the only one that's got that question. And I'd rather you ask it as we go along rather than it's in the chat box and we go to it afterwards. But, you know, if you pop it in the chat box, it will be picked up as well. So my name's Martina Forman. I've been coaching people with neurodiverse conditions for over 7 years now. Loved every minute of it. I've met some absolutely amazing and super adorable people. And some of them are still in touch with me years later, because we've done so much lovely work and changed their lives with the coaching. I also do a lot of training, and here at Genius Within, neurodiversity is our passion. So I think we've probably got like the highest percentage of neurodiverse people actually within the organisation. Our director and founder, Dr. Nancy Doyle, has got ADHD. She writes for Forbes. So if you're interested in following some thought leaders, she'll be one of them. At the bottom, you can see we're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So if you're on any of those platforms and you just want to get little nuggets of information quite regularly, then please do hit us up. Okay, so the next slide. As Jodie was saying, as an employer, how do you engage with young people who've got these hidden disabilities? We're going to talk about what these are. Why do we need to be aware? Then we're going to talk about the impact, things that you might be noticing. You're like, oh, that person just keeps not turning up on time or just forgetting stuff. Like, what's that about? They obviously don't want to be here. It's probably not that at all. So we're going to have a look at strengths and challenges for these young people, and then supporting apprentices. And I think Royston's going to come in and talk to you about how that can happen really effectively. So also managing diversity in performance, and hopefully you'll come away from this session with just loads and loads of top tips. I'm not expecting you to come away and be able to diagnose stuff, and that's not the point of this presentation. The point is, as Jodie was saying, you know, how to engage, like just have that raised awareness after you've had this session this morning of like, oh, okay, so that could be a thing. All right, let's talk to this young person about that. Maybe they don't even know. Okay, so I'm just going to pop to the next slide. So we are noticing that 90% of disabilities are not visible. Yeah, which is quite scary if you think about it. So when we are moving around the world, we're back in our offices and going to different sites, a lot of people around us will actually be struggling with something that we won't be able to see. Yeah, so this is a nice slide to just highlight that and just to be more aware of that. I'm sure that you've come across in your career loads of instances of this, and so you're very well aware of that, but we just like to also make that awareness just a little bit more profound, because it's such a difficulty for people who have got these neurodiverse conditions. Okay, so what is neurodiversity? And we've broken it down. So I think, are we sending out the slide deck to everybody so that we can have a look, Royston, in peace and quiet afterwards? Yeah, we are. All right, okay, cool. And you'll have the recording as well, I'm sure. So let's have a look at the left column. It's what I call the disses. And so many people with dyslexia and dyspraxia have asked me, why is it so hard to spell my condition? That's, you know, like a big old barrier. So we call that applied neurodiversity. You're born with it. It relates to your applied educational skills. So a lot of people with dyslexia, DCD is dyspraxia or developmental condition disorder, although I don't like calling them disorders. We've got dyscalculia, dysgraphia. And it's not considered a health condition. So if you've got one of these disses, yeah, you are still able to function. And a lot of the people that I coach, they often fly under the radar. So they might have mild to moderate dyslexia or dyspraxia. They'll have got through school with quite a bit of support. They've had some great teachers maybe who've given them a bit of extra time here and there, who've helped them to organise themselves. And it's not until they get into college or they're picked up as graduates when the employer says, oh, okay, so you're struggling more than your peers, so maybe we'll get you tested. So quite often these young people will not know actually that there's a thing going on with them, and that they operate differently. Moving over to the second column from the left, clinical neurodiversity. So again, born with the condition, but this relates to behavioural skills. And we've got Tourette's, autism and ADHD, and ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Again, me personally, I don't like calling them disorders. I saw a great YouTube video where a young person described himself as attention different. With autism, you've got some of the highest unemployed levels in this group of people. So if you actually meet somebody with autism who's autistic and managed to get through and start work, then they've done really, really well. Yeah, because autistic people just struggle so much. What we're noticing is that with autism, you've got your nervous system's like on hyper alert all the time. It's like super sensitive. And if you're autistic, you've often got stuff that's co-occurring. Yeah, so lots of different stuff happening. So it's quite, it can be a big one to manage. Tourette's, I don't know if you saw, there was a really cool film out last year when we were still allowed to go to the cinema, called Motherless Brooklyn. And the lead character had Tourette's in that. Also, we have, I can't remember his name now because I'm not good with names. But one of our ambassadors at Genius, what's his name? David?
Paul Stevenson.
Oh, Paul, yeah, that's right. Paul Stevenson is one of our ambassadors, and he was on, was he on our Employable Me program? Me. Yeah, thanks, Royce. So if you have a look at the Genius Within YouTube channel, you can see what Tourette's is all about, because Paul has been very open and vulnerable with his Tourette's, and as have the other people who are in the Employable Me program that was filmed with the BBC. So Nancy was the psychologist who worked on that program. So if you wanted to have a little bit more exposure to what it means, then by all means, have a look at our YouTube channel. Just have a look at the videos we put in there for you. Let's move on to the right-hand columns. So you've got transient and chronic acquired neurodiversities. So some of the people that I've worked with and coached will have had cancer or some serious disease, or anxiety and depression. And so they will have something that is there for some time. So I don't know if any of you have dealt with anyone who's had serious disease, or if you've had it yourself, you might have brain fog. You might just not, your mind just might not be as sharp as it once was. Your physical exhaustion will lead to mental exhaustion, things like that. But with the right care, you will, the person will move on from this. And then the far right column, you've got the chronic. So someone I worked with had a stroke, and his short-term memory was gone. So anything that he needed to learn, and this guy was building satellites up in Stevenage. He took me to see one, and it's about the size of a transit van. And he says, "How much do you think that is?" And I thought, "Oh, I don't know, 100 million, 350 million for a satellite." And this guy's not able to learn the instructions to wire the thing up properly. So obviously he was very upset. So in coaching, we worked out how to help him to not have to feel so much anxiety around this memory loss. So we just we got him to take some recorded information in with him. So this may stabilize, but it continues to be debilitating. So we're covering all of that when we talk about neurodiversity, because you're outside of the typical, what we consider typical, like you're good at like knowing what the time is, staying on time, your memory's pretty decent, you can always organize yourself quite well. So all of the things that typically people on average are able to do well, neurodiversity will be above average or below average. Yes, that's what we're looking at. Okay. I'm noticing there's some chat going on. If there's anything, oh right, great, thanks Royston. Okay, Veronica, can I just, yeah, so in the chat box we've just heard that there is also the neurodivergent. Yeah, so it's up to the individual to decide what they want to be calling themselves. Yeah, and I think it was in the 90s, Judy Singer actually coined the phrase neurodiversity while working on her thesis. So that's the first time that concept of being outside of your typical average came into being, and neurodivergent has been built on top of that. Yeah, so we call it neurominorities as well. It is, because it's so new, there's differing thinking about it, and everything is valid. So we're here at Genius, we accept everyone's idea of who they are. Yeah. So neurodivergent, neurodiverse, neurominorities, it's all completely valid. Okay, thanks so much for using the chat box. Let's pop to the next slide. So here's a lovely little chart. It's based on the work of Mary Colley, and it's called the Dander chart. And the percentage on the left, whenever we walk into an office space or anywhere, we're considering that 15 to 20%, so what, about 1.5 to 2 people out of 10 will be neurominorities. You'll be able to tick some boxes, and they'll have, if we go around from the top of this lovely chart here, dyscalculia, dyslexia, ADHD, Tourette's, or acquired neurodiversity, mental health, autism, dyspraxia. Yeah, so you'll be able to notice that they might not know they've got it, they might be hiding it because of the stigma. Yeah, but hopefully after this training, this presentation, you'll notice a little bit more about spotting these things, and also having a possibly difficult conversation with that person and saying, "Oh, I've noticed that this is happening, and I've had a bit of training, and it could be this, like, what do you know about this? Yeah, so quite often the biggest problem that we've got is the stigma attached to any of these labels. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has had any experience of this, but I'd be, you know, really happy to have you share it at any point if you're feeling brave. Yeah, so any of these things we would call neurodiverse, neurodivergent, and it is being outside of your average. All right, so on the left hand side we've got ASC, so that's autism spectrum condition, or autism, and there is an overlap with dyspraxia, and we've got honesty in this box, and below we've got sensory awareness. But what we've got here is your nervous system is paying a lot more attention to things. So with dyspraxia, you've got heightened sensitivity. So I had one of my coachees who's got ADHD and dyspraxia. She works for the NHS doing leaflets, and her line manager turned around to her and said, "You have to be less sensitive." Yes, that happened. And I said, well, okay, you can try, but it's a bit like saying you have to like not hear so much when you're in a busy office. You know, you can cover your ears up with noise cancelling headphones, but your body's still sensing stuff. So asking someone to not be who they are, that is, yeah, not helpful. Other things like asking someone who's autistic to just go with the flow, really tricky, because you know, when you've got so much going on and paying attention to so much, the flexibility sort of goes out the window a little bit. Asking someone across the top, we've got the disses. You can see we've like dished it up like that. With dyspraxia, you've got so some of my best social workers have got hidden dyspraxia, which I call the unloved cousin of dyslexia, because loads of people get diagnosed with dyslexia, but they've actually got dyspraxia as well. So if you've got a young person who's hugely sensitive to the needs of others, who always just says yes, or yeah, I'll do it, who doesn't really have good boundaries, they're likely to have dyspraxia as well. Yeah, so you've got huge amounts of empathy and intuition. Yeah, so a lot of my dyspraxics, their whole family comes to them for advice. You know, they're like the agony aunt or uncle of the family. So that happens quite a lot. With dyscalculia at the top, you've got really innovative thinking and really good verbal skills. Yeah, so your young person might just really struggle measuring stuff, but then they'll be able to like imagine how everything is built in their heads, which is what happens if you've got the dyslexia, dyscalculia. The disses, you've got fantastic 3D imagination, like spatial awareness. Yeah, so there's always a bit of a trade-off when we're looking at neurodiversity. There's always something they're really good at and something that they're not so good at. Yeah, and so the trick is to support people finding out where their weaknesses are, and not playing to those, but playing to their strengths. Okay, any questions about this chart? Thanks. Yeah, thanks for popping that stuff into the chat box there, Royston. Any questions? I'm just going to pause. Yeah. Does everybody know somebody who's got one of these neurodiverse conditions? Yeah. It's good fun, isn't it? Yeah. Like amazing lateral thinking. You've got people who will just do things so differently. You don't know where it's come from, but it's just amazing. So a lot of really innovative thinking has come out of neurodiverse heads. Yeah, so thanks for sharing that in the chat box there. Please carry on doing that. Yeah, okay, so yeah, and with Tourette's, it's a lot of well-being, emphasis on well-being and sort of stress management. A lot of stress management going on there to reduce the amount of ticking. I think there's still so much research that we need to do to discover more about, you know, where it's come from, what's happening. I've got some really cool slides for you, so I'm going to just delve into them. So I'm going to pop to the next slide. So with all this, I told you there was a trade-off, and one of the biggest trade-offs is working memory. Now, if you think of all the things that you have, so what's today? Wednesday, so that's a bit of information. What's the time? Oh, it's 10:24, so that's a bit of information. What you're doing next? The email has to happen, another meeting has to happen, you have to go and pick up kids or someone. Yeah, so all of those things are bits of information. Yeah, all the things you already know are bits of information, and pulling that out. So we've got a little diagram here of a claw machine at an arcade. Yeah, so just imagine that you're going for an interview. All right, so say your young person has come to you for an interview. Yeah. And they're trying to fish out some information. You've said, right, okay, so tell me about all your life experience so far. It's all in there. Yeah, so you just imagine there's a little grab arm, like going, all right, I'm going to go for not the cuddly toys, I want to go for that expensive toy that's in this glass box here. Yeah, so those are all my bits of information in my head, and I want to go for the one that's like the important one that this person wants to know. And then you're just moving in your little grabby arm with, you know, you're moving into position, someone switches the lights off, and then you're just grabbing around in the dark. So that is the sense of weakness in working memory. So when you put people on the spot, you ask people, like without warning them, you're going to ask them certain bits of information, they will panic. They might blurt some stuff out and talk about all sorts of other stuff until they remember what it is that you want to know from them, or they might never tell you what you need to know. And that is because when you put people on the spot, you've got a weakness in working memory, which comes hand in hand with creative thinking. Yeah, it's a bit of a trade-off. Yeah, you have to be able to have this kind of randomizing brain and a bit of a blank canvas to be able to be so creative. This is what happens. So a good top tip is to give out interview questions a week in advance if you can. Yeah, don't let your young person struggle, especially if they've got dyspraxia and autism. They are going to like just panic, and the whole run up to any dealings, they'll have huge anxiety because they want to do well. Yeah, but if you've got dyspraxia, you have difficulty organizing your thoughts and putting them into order. Yeah, and if you want to get the best out of the person you're talking to for them to deliver information in the right order at the right time, like give them the questions. They can come in with their notes, they might not even look at their notes, but you know you're going to get the best out of that person by allowing them to prepare effectively. Yeah, so that works really well. Let's pop along to the next slide. Again, we're going to keep talking about working memory. And another reason why there is a poor working memory, often with creative thinkers, yeah, so all those people, those labels you saw in that chart with all the bubbles, is because all the information comes at the same time, because they're built to be like airport radars. My picture is an airport radar. It sort of looks like a satellite dish, but it's basically you've got somebody who's always picking up information, always at the same time. So quite often I'll work with people who are sat in an open plan office, which someone thought was a good idea a few decades ago. But for your average person, it reduces productivity by about 23%. Yeah, open plan workspaces. So just for your average person, productivity goes down by almost a quarter. But if you've got somebody who's neurodiverse or neurodivergent, their brains are listening out like 360 all the time. If you've got someone with dyspraxia and autism, their bodies are listening 360 all the time. Yeah, you can say, go over in that corner, concentrate on filling in your forms. Yeah, and they will not, unless they've got noise cancelling headphones, unless they know everyone that's in the room, they will not be able to settle to do that job really well because their bodies, their senses are ramped up to pick out so much more information. Yeah, and that's why we've said documents might need to be read several times before being understood. You might want to, if they're struggling reading, you might want to give them a reading ruler, which is a, so here's some kit that I borrowed off of Royston a couple of years ago. I might eventually give it back to you. But look, if you've got somebody who's a holistic thinker and you've got a bit of paper in front of them, yeah, so you're doing, like, go off and do some training, off you go. They are going to look at this bit of paper and try and suck it all up all at once. Yeah, so that's why sometimes it takes a few reads to get through it. But if you give them nice, what's this color, blue, a reading ruler, what it does is you've got a bar. So this is your like old school bit of plastic, but you can use this in the computer as well. It's called Read Write Gold. What you can do is you can get the person to just take that reading ruler and go down through the page. And what it does is it helps that person just to read one line at a time. Yeah, one line at a time. What it does is it stops that person trying to suck in all the information at the same time, which is what they like to do. Because that's when you're being creative, that's how you are creative. You're just taking everything in at once. The other thing that happens, so on the left, I'm just reading off the slide, is individuals can also zone out in meetings or forget verbal instructions. Now, let me tell you about the zone outs. I had somebody at the Wellcome Trust, she'd be in a meeting, she'd be listening, okay, she'd be formulating stuff, and then something would be said that made her think of another question that she needed to ask her line manager, okay? So she was like, oh, what do I do with that? So we came up with a system in her notebook where if something like that popped into her head, and remember, if you've got weakness in working memory, it will pop in and then just disappear. It will be gone. You'll never find it again. It's very frustrating. She opened a separate tabbed page near the back of her notebook and wrote it down. The things she had, like a page for like questions for line manager. Yeah. So she'd capture it in a place where she knew she'd find it again. And then she'd go back to the page where she was listening to the meeting and taking notes in that. And so she had a couple of different spaces for stuff that would just fly in and out of her head to actually capture that and put it somewhere. Yeah. So allowing people to, you know, zoning out might be that if you're dyspraxic, you're just overwhelmed and you just can't take on board any more information. So you might just need to like look out the window for 30 seconds and just have a breather because you've been processing so much information. And that's usually why people are zoning out, because it's nothing personal, because they are overloaded with information. So it might be that there's people talking over each other. It might be that they don't understand the terminology. Yeah. A really lovely way of supporting somebody if they are struggling in a meeting is to allow them to have a dictaphone, or like we're doing is to record the meeting. And so what that does is it just takes all the stress and anxiety out of trying to remember everything and put it in the right order. And so you can listen back to it. So a lot of my clients, they'll get the recording devices out, but then because it's helped them so much, they've relaxed because they know it's being captured somewhere, this information, that they never listen back to their recordings. Yeah. So then we have to work out, you know, you have to take some time to delete all these recordings, otherwise you're just going to have 50 million recordings on your dictaphone. So the next bit is forgetting verbal instructions. So if you've got a young person and you say, look, here's 5 things I need you to do, they might remember one and they might go off and do 4 other, like 7 different things. Yeah. So always writing stuff down. Yeah. Or letting them write stuff down. So empowering them to go, oh, stop, let me stop you there. Right. What was the first thing? Let me write that down. Yeah. So you just need to notice that they might be struggling with stuff and then go, oh, I noticed that I gave you 3 instructions. You did 1 thing. Okay. So I'm just noticing that. What can we do differently next time so you can capture the things that need to get done? So what would work well for you? And then just work with the young person and see what works well for them, because they'll come up with it. never fear. All right, so if I was in a room with you, I would be walking over to the flip chart or whiteboard, and I would be drawing this up for you. So you've got on the left, you've got a neurotypical body. On the right, you've got a neurodiverse body, and there's different stuff happening in the old noggin. Yeah. On the left, the way that we're describing it is a square. So there's ability to think through information sequentially. You're delivering, you're taking the person on the journey from A to B, to C, to D. Yeah, because you can do that because you can fish information out quite effectively. Typically, you can hold 7 bits of information. On the right hand side, what you've got is somebody who's always thinking in 3D, who's always thinking there's a problem here, and I need to solve it. Like, this could be better. So what you've got, and this is obviously why it's fantastic to have neurodiverse people in the team, and that's why that, you know, we have them as part of the makeup of humanity, is to constantly be looking at systems and processes and thinking about how they could be improved. Yeah, so that's how we got little things like DVDs. So who thinks of like piece of plastic and a laser beam? No one, except someone who's severely dyslexic. Yeah, so there's so many things that people have thought up because they've got this way of being wired, yeah, that we're relying on them to solve some of our most critical problems, of which we have quite a few nowadays. Yeah, so that's why it's really important to spot these things, like spots that somebody's got one of these conditions. Great, okay, you have this thing, so how are you helping yourself? What can I do to help you? Yeah, so reducing the stigma around it and like coming together and going, right, okay, like what things do we need to put in place for you? Okay, cool, I'm not going to give you any more verbal instructions unless I'm going to send you an email to, you know, give you the bullet points to what I'm telling you, or I'm never going to talk to you unless you've got your dictaphone handy. Yeah, so little things like that. I had one of my coachees, his line manager was just pulling her hair out because they'd have like 2-hour conversations about like this really, you know, important project they were just going to start, and then after 2 hours of talking about it, he'd go off and sit in his booth next to her, and then about half an hour in, he'd go, Melanie, what was that thing you were saying? So it would have, because there was so much, it popped right out of his head. And Mel was just like, oh my God. But then we worked out, like, you know, recording it on a dictaphone, so then Colin could just listen back and go, aha. And on these dictaphones, they're very clever. I don't know if any of you have got a dictaphone. No, you can bookmark stuff. Yeah, so when you're going through, you just press the little bookmark button, and then it just sort of takes you to that bit of information, yeah, really quickly. So using these little devices, little support mechanisms, can really take the weight off to help you to just be at your best and, like, you know, get through and like solve problems. The other interesting thing, and I don't know whether any of you've noticed this, if you've got, you know, people who've got dyslexia, dyspraxia, what have you, is that they will tell you in advance of something that's going to happen that's not going to go well, and help you to correct for that. So if you've got somebody, has anyone ever noticed that? Or do you do it yourself? You're like, that's going to happen. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I've just pressed the button there. There we go. What's happening is if you have a look at the right hand body, is that they're always thinking of the beginning and middle and the end. So typically, if you have some kids in front of you, and you go, right, go off and do this job. Your neurotypical kids are just like, go, yeah, okay, cool, I'm going to do this job. Your neurodiverse kids are go, why are we doing it? Yeah. Can you tell me, like, what's happened just before and what's brought us to why I'm doing this job, and then what's going to happen as a result of doing this job? And you can't switch that off. You can kind of repress it, yeah, but you can never get someone to stop thinking about the reason why they're doing something and the consequences. And that is very typical of somebody who's neurodiverse. So why am I doing this? And that is why you've got things like computers, because Alan Turing was like, we need to do this code breaking a little bit differently. So I'm going to create a massive machine. Just completely divergent thinking going on there. Okay. Also, what you've got, and this is quite often what you would consider a trade-off. So instead of being able to read, so if we have a look at the top left, you've got like an eyeball there. So for everybody, if you just hold your head still and kind of like side eye, so you can like see maybe furniture, maybe some curtains, or like what other people, you can't see that much detail. So you're using the rods in your eyeballs. Now, if you were to look down at a piece of text, some small stuff, hieroglyphs on the page, what you're using is a different structure called the cones or the fovea. And when you're using these structures in your eyeballs, you are processing the fine detail. Yes, text. Now, what happens is when you're processing fine detail, it takes longer. Yeah. The fovea are physically different. So you might have someone who's dyslexic saying, oh, you know, it's all in my head. I can't actually. What we're discovering, and the scientists only discovered this in 2017, is that the fovea in your eyeball are built differently. So when you've got dyslexia, it just takes longer to zone in onto these letters, about 40% on average. And have a think of it like this, is a parallel. If you've got someone who's a big picture thinker, so if you have a look on their right body, big picture thinker, thinking about everything at once, letting stuff come in and out, why would their body be built to look at small, fine detail when their brain is not set up to do that? Yeah. So if you've got kids who are just beating themselves up for reading slowly because that's what happens in school, yeah, we're all like, oh, they're quicker than me, and they can read out loud and they can do maths. You know, you're always trying to be normal. What you've got is these young people who know that they're not typical, but they might be carrying some baggage with them. So I say people are like, oh, do I have to be more empathetic? I would say if you want to be, that's great. But what I would recommend is just being more curious and going, okay, so, all right, so tell me what's happened. Well, that's interesting. All right, so what's happening now? Right, let's have a look at what's happening now with you. So you're reading through your forms, you're not getting your portfolios done so quickly. Okay, cool. All right, so talk me through what's happening there. Yeah, so they might not, as I said, they might not be aware of exactly what's happening, but if you're curious, yeah, and curiosity creates a boundary between the thing that's happening and the person, you can both take a step back and go, okay, so when we print out my portfolio on whites, yeah, actually I get a headache by the end of the day, and I'd rather see my work on red paper, because red paper just relaxes my eye. So it could be that you might want a pack of different coloured papers in your office space, yeah, when you're meeting these young people, and just ask them which colour do you like looking at, because that will make a big difference because of that difference in the eyeball. Yeah, so you've got two big things just to be aware of, is the working memory and the processing speed, which is the difference in the eye. All right, any questions, comments, anything about that? You go to, right, so thank you, Rebecca. How can you diagnose a difference in the eye? So often your person will know that they read a bit slower. And the way that you would diagnose it is to just get tested. You could go to an optician and ask for a colorimetry test. So that's color and metry. The pathway to get a diagnosis is you could go to your GP. If the young person isn't employed as yet, go to GP and say, look, I've always struggled in school, I'll read a bit slower, thanks Royston, and I'm really forgetful, I'm like, I just can't organize myself. Yeah, so it might be go to GP, say you have a right to choose, and find a person or group that you'd like to get your make use of an optometrist, get your diagnosis from. I mean, I've had people in their like late 30s and 40s just take themselves off to a psychologist somewhere. I had one lady who was like, I just went to Harley Street and I paid someone £500 and now I know I've got ADHD and I feel so much better for it. So all right, so Katie's saying so young people, so just not using white paper at all. The probation service, I think they used to, I don't know if they still do, but they just used recycled paper throughout. So there's some organizations that will just not use white, because we know in studies that the white causes really high contrast and it causes extra fatigue. And if you've got dyspraxia, which a lot of people they don't know they've got it, I always look out for fatigue points and contrast. So turning down the contrast on your screen, getting different tints of paper in, even getting tinted glasses will reduce the fatigue and you'll be able to look at stuff for longer. So it's quite a big one, that one. Right, anything else? Or just as we go through. Let me just pop to the next slide. You're very welcome. Oh yes, so that's still typing. All right, great. Can I introduce you, everybody, to something that we call the Spiky Profile? So the reason it's called spiky is because, can you see the purple line is going up above the middle line and down below the middle line, and there's a little turquoise line there as well. That's what we would call your neurotypical person, your average, who are not particularly brilliant at building IKEA stuff. And the guy who created IKEA is severely dyslexic, which is why in IKEA everything has a name, because everything has to have a purpose. And not particularly rubbish at being late for things, like missing deadlines and stuff like that. So the relationship with time, if you're neurotypical, is really good. Your relationship with your stuff, your spatial awareness will be much better than someone who is neurodiverse, typically. Yeah, so that's why we give this name to this profile. And one of my pet hates is when people go, so say if you've got dyslexia and like it just takes you longer to read through stuff. Some of my dyslexics eat books for breakfast. They love reading. Some of them won't touch a book with a barge pole. So it depends on your person. Yeah, which is why I say be curious, get to know your person and get to understand what their particular strengths and weaknesses are. But typically you've got the Spiky Profile where people will go for testing, and when you've got one of the DISs, you go for a 3-hour test. It's quite painless, and after 3 hours you'll have done all sorts of tests, your brain will have melted, you'll come out staggering going, oh, okay, so like I've just been tested to the extreme. Then within about a week you'll get like a 50-page report full of words and maybe some numbers, which most people then put in a drawer and forget about because it's loads of text and they don't understand it. So there's a gap between getting your diagnosis and actually understanding what that means. So your young person might have been diagnosed, but they will have no idea what that means. So what we've pioneered at Genius is something called a positive assessment, where a psychologist will sit with the person and say, well, these are your strengths. We've noticed you're really good at collecting this information and putting it together to create something new. You're really good at just thinking laterally. You're really good at like your perceptual orientation and organization. Yeah. So, and then you might want to support yourself with these certain things for these weaknesses that you have, that we've tested you with. So that's what we're doing here at Genius Within, is helping people to come away from a test going, I'm actually really cool. Yeah, even though, you know, people used to mock me in school for being the slowest reader and not being able to ever spell that well. Yeah, because just couldn't see it in time, it wasn't quick enough. So that is a Spiky Profile, if ever you come across it. Who's come across something called the Spiky Profile? No, yes, no, yeah. All right, cool. So now you know what that means. we like to call people specialist thinkers. Yeah, so it's really interesting that, you know, when you start off in your job, you kind of need to be good at everything, and then you niche, and then you just become more and more skilled at a certain thing, and then you become specialist. So in a sense, these people are going the other way. They started specialists, and quite often they're trying to be more generalists. But what we're saying is just work to the person's strengths and they will find their own way. Okay. Oh, just a little bit about the diagnosis of the behavioural conditions. So Tourette's and autism and ADHD and ADD. The waiting lists are huge. So I don't know if any of you got kids waiting for any of these diagnoses. I feel your pain. It can take 2 years to get a diagnosis for those things. And some people just, they lose the will. So they're trying to, so one of my best friends, her son has lightly got ADHD, and she's constantly having to fight. So unfortunately, the story at the moment in schools, oh, thanks, yeah, sometimes up to 5 years. By the time your young person has come to you, if they've got one of these diagnoses, you know that they've already had to have a big fight to get to where they are already. So they might just be exhausted and just want to get on with their life, or they might have a bit of fight left in them. So that's the conversation I usually have with people, is like, how much energy have you got to educate the people around you to get things done in the way you need to get them done? And how can we help you to have more energy to do that? Thanks for sharing, Sophie. Yeah, so it just takes such a long time because of all the interactions required to prove this thing, because me personally, I'm thinking we don't know enough about the stuff to be able to just tick box it as we do for the DISs. So with the DISs, it's more of a tick box, like 3 hour, yeah. Whereas with the behavioral stuff, it's, well, obviously it's a behavioral thing. Yeah. All right, lovely. Oh, yeah, Katie, thank you for sharing that. So there's in the chat box, there is a lovely link to Google Chrome extension. And also on Google Chrome, I don't know if any of you know that there's Dark Reader. So you can just invert the colors. So if you've got, I've got Apple. I think I'm quite lazy, so I just need one button to do everything. So that's just who I am. But with Apple, I press the side button, the power button 3 times, and poof, everything just goes dark. So my eyes go, oh, thank you. So if that happens for you, then you know that you need things to be in dark mode more often. Yeah. And I think there's been a prevalence to have everything really bright, and more people going, this tints, this works really well for me. So have a little play with that for yourselves, and then you can be great role models for the people that you come into contact with. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Right. All right, thanks, Royston, for putting that in there. That's very helpful. Okay, so what are the spikes? So just thinking back to what we just saw, the spiky profile. So the ones that are, you know, spikes above average, the psychologists would call them perceptual reasoning and verbal reasoning. So those 2 left columns. Perceptual reasoning is defining projects and goals, visual and mechanical thinking. If you were to go into an architectural office or engineering office, you'd hope that they would have some of these people in there that are thinking in 3D a lot of the time. Yeah. If you haven't, then I don't know if you'd be doing that well in that office. Identifying the bigger picture. So these brains are set up to just see that. Like Richard Branson, he's in his autobiography, he says he's severely dyslexic, and his head teacher at the time said, you're either going to do really well or you're going to prison, which I've signed other times. And Richard Branson himself has got 2 PAs to do all the reading and paperwork. Yeah, so he knows where his strengths lie, so he will do stuff where his brain is engaged in things like noticing patterns, bigger picture thinking, and stuff like that to steer his business. The verbal reasoning, so here's the trick. Once the information's in, yeah, and it might take a little bit longer to get it in, when you've got this 3D thinking, you can explain it from different angles. Yeah, So I had somebody tell me that over a dinner party, she explained a really complicated policy that the government had just created to like members of the family for all different ages. And the way she did that was using the concept of cups. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to go into that because it sounds complicated and interesting at the same time. It could take up the whole of the session. So being able to take the information in and then translate it into something that people understand well is a strength. Yeah, and also you've got making links between ideas and advanced constructs. So if you give that young person the extra amount of time to really work with that information, it could well be you get them to not sit down, you get them to stand up at a flip chart, or like do a spidergram or a brain map or a mind map on a whiteboard and talk it through with them. If you've got someone with ADHD, if they're sitting still, they're probably not paying such exquisite attention as when they are moving around or allowed to get up and move around and come back. Yeah, so when you've got your young person, if you say, oh, why don't you try this, and like, have you tried this, and let's just try this, and then they will start to understand what it is that their needs are, because quite often that hasn't been offered to them earlier. Especially if they've been trying to like keep the head down in a mainstream school. They're just, trying to duck under the radar. Thanks, Jodie. Yeah, the dark mode. Yeah, it's just so everything just goes, when you go into dark mode. I don't know who else is like that, but I'm like that. On the right-hand side, you've got the two weaknesses I was telling you about. So processing speed is to do with the eyeball thing. Yes, it's your ability to process and get through information, but also in the noggin, your ability to take on board concepts. Now, remember I was telling you about the guy from IKEA, and everything in IKEA has got a name. I don't know, IKEA is a bit like Marmite, you love or hate it. But if the information is not meaningful and it doesn't serve a purpose, your young person with one of the DISs or any of these conditions might not latch onto it as quickly and easily. So it might be that they need a bit more help to understand what it is that you're telling them, because it's so abstract that the brain's like, yeah, no, I can't help you. Yeah, so it might be that you need to physically walk them through if they're more of a kinesthetic learner. Yeah, or you need to tell a story. Yeah, so if they're like auditory empathetic. Yeah, so you will know what to do if you get in that blank look. You're like, how do you need me to explain that to you? Yeah, so what I'm trying to do is to get you to not have to do too much thinking and check your crystal ball too much, but just keep being curious and going, right, so when you've learned and that's gone really well for you in the past, what's been happening for you? Yeah, when you're learning really well, like, what's your environment like? Yeah, what tools and resources have you got when you're learning really well? Yeah, what skills have you got when you're learning well? What are your behaviors? Okay, and then you already know, back on the slide, working memory, holding on to details of what you've seen or heard. You can never take it personally. If you've got a creative brain in front of you and they've completely forgotten what you've just said, it's not personal, honestly. They probably just heard one thing you've said and connected with some other stuff that you said before, and are coming up with like some sort of new thing for you. Yeah, so they might just have stopped listening to you because they've thought of something else that's equally amazing as what you've just told them. Yeah, so working to support the young person when that's happening is really quite powerful. It makes you amazing when you're doing that. Yeah, so they'll be doing lots of stuff and you won't even know they're doing it. They won't even know they're doing it half the time. All right, any questions or anything about that? No, there's the chat box for you. Right, how long have I got, Royce? Yeah, I'm all right. All right,
all good.
I'm all good. All right, so yeah, thanks, Royce. So yeah, a great tip when supporting individuals with weaker working memories, ask them to take their own notes and give them enough time to do that really well. Our next slide we've got in front of us is normal activities. Royston, why is this called normal activities?
It's called normal activities because these are the areas when people come to us for coaching that they require the most support in. So these are their normal executive functions that require the most attention.
Thank you. Right. Yeah, that makes more sense. So of all the thousands of people that we've worked with at Genius, yeah, and they've not all had. So remember, I've worked with people who've had all sorts of different things like Huntington's, recovery from cancer, strokes, all sorts of things, let alone neurodiversities. And a lot of the time we're working on memory and concentration. And you know what? If someone's stressed, memory and concentration goes right down. And there's a really good quote from a book written by Daniel Goleman in his book Emotional Intelligence, and I think it's my favorite. It's like, I think the shortest sentence in the whole book. Stress makes us stupid. Yes, that has been like physically proven. So we all know that we start getting stressed, then we become less useful. Yeah, so looking at ways of helping that young person to manage their stress, structure, planning, preparation. The next one, organizational skills, is something we work on so much. And just pip to the post is time management. Now, time management and organization go hand in hand. You can't be organized without taking time to do it. Yes, like you have to stop. I always say to my people, I have to slow you down to speed you up. Yeah. So the number of times where they've been looking for their car keys and their mobile phone, and then they've opened the fridge and they found them because they came in with the shopping and they just chucked everything in the fridge and like carried on with their lives. So little things like just being mindful of noticing where you're putting your stuff, where you want to find it again, is really helpful. So if your young person comes to you, like they've got like their portfolio and there's just papers exploding out of it, you're like, stop, right? Now, how did this get to this place, and how can we support you to create a more organized situation in your portfolio and your learning? Yeah, quite often the people that I work with, so a lot of my neurodiverse people, will have no relationship with time, none. They won't even know what time means. I had one lady who's a school teacher. Every clock in her house was set at a different time: 20 minutes fast, 5 minutes slow, 6 minutes fast. Her husband was so traumatized he could not look at a clock anymore. Like any clock, he just couldn't look at it because he didn't know what time it was. So he just stopped looking at any other clock. Yeah. So what I often do with people, especially people who've got dyspraxia, who will always be giving away their time to other people, is to just notice, how long is it taking you to do a thing? Let's test you under some conditions. How long does it take you to read a piece of paper in an office? How long does it take you to read the same piece of paper, same notes at home at different times of day? Yeah, so what times of day are you at your best? So managing time, just noticing where the time is going. I was just reading something because I'm really into this system called a bullet journal. And this person was talking about managing attention. Yeah, so it's, where is my attention going? So that would be like a subcategory of time management and organization, is like, what is my attention going on? Why is it going there? Am I like in zombie mode where I just need to get stuff done? Like, you know, shelf stacking kind of thing, like just doing simple things? Or am I in like more mentally focused mode? And what times of day do those things happen? And then 67% we work on communication, because remember, if you're having trouble fishing out the right information at the right time, how can we support you with that? Word finding is an issue. So if you're a young person, if the people around you are like, oh, it's on the tip of my tongue, it's on the tip of my tongue, if that happens a lot, yeah, that could be an indicator as well of being a little bit neurodiverse. Yeah, it's like, oh, I was going to say something, but it's completely popped out my head. Or like, oh, I know how to spell this. I used to spell this really well, but I can't spell it now. Yeah, so I had one guy who would stand, he's a regional housing association director, and he'd stand at the flip chart and he'd say his handwriting was bad because he'd scratch out the words on the flip chart because he couldn't spell that well. Yeah, it's a fantastic manager. He always had his eye on everything, had a great overview, but just his spelling was a bit rubbish because of his dyslexia. And that's totally fine. Yeah. Think about what jobs you could dish out to different people. Yeah. So playing to people's strengths. Okay. We're almost at the end. You've done super well. That's like an hour's worth of concentrating. Well done, everybody. So here's some pictures that we've got on our Instagram. And I'll let you have a look at that in your own time. So just trying to get everybody just to think a bit differently and be a bit more open with the neurodiversities and just be a bit more curious with these pictures. And we haven't really talked about any of the legalities, so let's just quickly have a look at that. Back in 2006, there was a convention in the United Nations, and they spoke about accommodations and adjustments and universal design. So the reason you can talk at your phone or computer is because of the United Nations Convention. Let's talk about the legal framework. So I don't know if you know this already, you probably do. So I apologise for telling you something you already know, but the Equalities Act of 2010, which the Disabilities Discrimination Act was incorporated into, says that there's no actual need for a diagnosis. Yeah, so I'm just going to read off the slide. It is the effect, not the cause or the impairment that matters. Employers are required to make reasonable adjustments to enable their employees meet their potential. Yeah, and on the right hand side of the slide, a person that has a disability, if they have a physical or mental impairment that has substantial and long term, so 12 months or more, adverse effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. Yeah, so if you've been struggling with this thing for a year or more, you have a thing. Yeah, it doesn't matter. What happens quite often is people, they feel a sense of validation, like, oh my God, yeah. So that lady who took herself off to Harley Street and got herself diagnosed with ADHD, she knew she had something all these years. Her daughter just got diagnosed with ADHD and dyspraxia. And this stuff, it runs in the family. Yeah, so my cousin started his life as an apprentice. So that's why I highly value apprenticeships. He started off as an apprentice. Yeah, his dad used to like just be horrible to him because he's got dyslexia, my cousin. So it runs in the family. So my cousin started off as an apprenticeship. He had to get up really early. It was really hard. He was like, what was he, very young, and he had to go very far away. But he sort of managed to get through it with the support of his grandma. And 20 years later, he's still there. He's thriving there. He's an engineer. He repairs MRI machines. Yeah, like super complicated. He told me at one point one of his colleagues switched something on and a pen went flying past his face because it's magnetic. Yeah, so it's quite a dangerous thing to do, to repair MRI machines. But he's been doing it for 20 years. He absolutely loves it. And because he's got dyslexia, he can go onto a site and in his brain already visualize and imagine all the wiring and the build of these machines. So he's already doing that, going onto sites, which is, remember the Spiky Profile. So that's an above average. That's like a gift, you know, we call it a gift, a talent, a skill, but it's typical of someone who's neurodiverse to be able to just lay stuff out in front of them in their minds. So many times I've said to people, oh, so when you're taking apart a car engine and putting it back together just using your imagination, like, do you know that's not normal? Like, that's really dyslexic. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, one of my clients who's still in touch with me sends me pictures of his pottery, bless him. He's already retired, but when I met with him, he was doing some voluntary work, and he used to work in a factory. When he started there, he said, give me a couple of weeks to acclimatise myself, because he's the production manager in the Aston Martin factory. And like after about 3 weeks, a month, he knew where every car in that factory was and what was happening to it, because he could just track it in his head. That's not normal. That's dyslexia. Yeah. Another guy who I worked with, he was of the age of where he used to get beaten up for not being able to spell properly. It's shocking, I know. So he was traumatized by any idea of writing stuff, and he just got promoted, and he would feel huge anxiety when trying to write up an email, and I said to him, like, Pete, what did you used to do before this job? Like, tell me like one of your favorite jobs before this job, working in this research place. He said, well, Martina, I used to walk into houses as a removals man, walk through the house, look at all the furniture and come out and then just fit it all beautifully into the back of the truck. And I was the best one in my gang at doing it. And I was like, Pete, that's because you've got severe dyslexia. That's why you're really good at that. Yeah, so his ability to tessellate was directly attributed to his way of wiring. And that kind of thing is a protected condition because it's a minority, because we've got these neurominorities. We call those protected conditions. So if somebody's struggling at work, it's down to the employer to change the way of working, not the employee. So that is the other really big thing that you probably know. And for us at Genius, we often come across people who are stuck in this place of the employer wants us to come in and wave a magic wand to change the person to suit the organization. But actually, legally speaking, that's the wrong way around. It's up to the employer to change to suit the employee. And I often joke, you know, it's not like the employees are asking for a mini bar and a jacuzzi in the corner. Like, they're not asking for that. They're just asking for some like different colored paper and a bit of software quite often. Yeah. Although quite often people say, yes, like, I think having a mini bar in the corner of the office is a fantastic idea, Martina. We should ask for that as a reasonable adjustment because of the stress they're putting us through. But just know that there's a little thank you party, but there is a little, there's that moment where you probably will come across like, oh, I wish this was different. Oh, you know, these systems are so slow. Why do we have to have these like tiny little screens on our laptops? Why can't I have a bigger screen to work off of? Actually, you should be having those reasonable adjustments. If like all of you now, you know, if you're sitting there looking down, so you're already putting extra strain on your C-spine. Yeah, so all of us looking on our phones, looking down, bad. Yeah, but I don't know how many of you have said to your employer, if you're self-employed, you know, be nice to yourself. Get yourself a big screen. Yeah, maybe even two, depending on how much data entry you're doing. Yeah, make sure that your adjustment to your seated area or even standing is good for your physical self. Yeah, so quite often what has to happen is a workplace assessment. So it might be the young person started. Anyone ever like had a workplace assessment? Yeah, got a workplace assessment sorted for somebody else. You can, I think Royston will probably help me put something in the chat box there, but you can ask Access to Work, and I think Royston might cover that. So if you know about Access to Work, you're ahead. So there's a lovely organisation, part of the government, bit of money from the government there that we can all access. All right, cool. So hopefully that's enough about the legal stuff and where we stand. So it's not up to you to like turn yourselves into like super like amazing people just to fit into your organization. You're amazing already. They need to fit to you. Yeah, so that's what we're saying. All right. The next, what we'd like to just quickly cover is levels of inclusion. So most organizations at the minute have moved away from exclusion. Yeah, purely because, you know, we've got nice laws in place. They moved into compliance and saying, yes, of course, yeah, okay, tick this box and tell us, you know, what your conditions are. Some organizations are ahead and they're moved into deliberate inclusion. And what we're supporting and helping people to do is something called systemic inclusion. So just like at the FCDO, they have on every computer, if you were to go into the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office now, you would have access to the software that talks to you, that reads your paperwork out to you. Standard. Yeah. And so lots of places are putting that on there on their systems for you to access. So there's 2 bits of software that are really cool that most people get. One's called Dragon. It's not Game of Thrones, although it does kill your computer because it's quite big and unwieldy. And Read Write Gold. So Text Help Read Write Gold and Dragon. So with those 2 bits of software, quite often I call it the holy trinity of support with a dictaphone. Your young person or whoever with one of these neurodiverse conditions will overcome these obstacles and challenges in the workplace. So that's what we're aiming for, is systemic inclusion. So it's like, oh, of course you can have a chair and a desk and a computer to do your work. Why would you not? So of course you can have the software, and of course you can record us in meetings. Why would you not? Yeah, so getting to that kind of place. All right, just some more facts and figures for you. We've got quite a high number of long-term unemployed people dyslexic. Don't even get me started talking about prison population. And then, as I said, autistic people, like 10 to 15% of those people have a job. So here we go. Actually, we did a project, we're still doing projects working in prisons, and we're noticing the high levels, embarrassingly high levels of young people with ADHD who have not been supported effectively in the community. So that's something just to be aware of. All right, so direct discrimination, it's just when you're making assumptions, just like my line manager saying to my client, you try not to be so sensitive. Yes, could have said that a bit differently. So being more curious, if someone's been asked, so there was a recent, I can't remember who it was, Empower or somebody, a big power company employed an autistic guy to do something, and then the guy was like, well, can you put me somewhere where it's a bit more quiet? And they were like, no, you have to sit there, and a few other things, and he requested some reasonable adjustments. They failed. He took them to court, he won. Yeah, so I'm just saying, why did he have to go to those lengths to just get things put in place? We can all do these things. Compromises can be made. And so that's how we would avoid victimization or harassment. And we're all different, so why not support the individual in the way they need to be supported? Just a little thing about indirect discrimination. We want you to move to the 3rd image. Oops, sorry, that was a bit too quick. So equality is like, yep, you've all got the same kit. And then moving towards equity is like, well, let's see how we distribute that kit. And then total equity is like, well, it's just going to be much easier for everybody. Yeah, but these things are so subtle that they often get missed. And so you might need someone just to come in and help you, or, you know, talk to a buddy about stuff. Adjustments, so mini bars, jacuzzis, what have you. That aside, lots of things, scheduling flexibility, a bit of training, environmental flexibility, assistive tech, you know, things that you've probably already come across, and some strategies. So you've already come across some in this presentation, but I don't know, if you've got any really cool strategies that you'd like to share in the chat box, then do let us know. We're always like to listen out to find out some new ones. And so just want to talk a little bit about success rates. The people that we work with at Genius, we've had 75% self-rated improvement in performance. And then we've asked the manager and they said, oh yes, that was 47%, so a little bit different perception. But if you're supporting somebody by being curious about their process and then supporting them to improve, then you will get improvement. And then they will retain their jobs and probably get promoted. So we're coming to the end of my bit, and we're gonna hand it over to Royston, I think. Is there any more there? Oh yeah, different strengths. We like this slide. I think there's too many slides in this presentation. Sorry about that. All right, Royston, is this for you, this slide? No, not yet.
Next one's me.
Next
oh,
one's
this
you.
one's me. Sorry, Bespoke Support. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
If you leave it on, can you flick for me in a minute?
Yep.
Yeah. So thanks for listening to that. That was a huge sort of overview of neurodiversity awareness from Martina. Martina really knows her stuff. So, you know, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat. If you think of some questions later, you want to come back to us, absolutely. You can drop us an email at info@geniuswithin.org and we'll follow up. Anything that's in the chat as well today, I will make sure is printed out because there was some really good questions in there, and there's some links and all sorts of things, so I'll pop those in as well. So moving on then, so bespoke support. So some of the things that we do for apprentices, trainees, all sorts of people going through educational systems, it really is designed with the apprentice and the business in mind, and also with funding in mind, because funding is a real sticking point for a lot of people. So this is a really simple graphic. Basically, we start off with some staff training and upskilling for the support staff. We provide some screening for individuals, and I will give you the link to our screening tool after this session, but it is on one of the slides also. So by screening, what we're looking at is a short questionnaire. It's 65 questions, which are yes and no. It is psychologically sound, so it's weighted in the background. So the answers that people give will give a psychological score behind. And from those scores, we can estimate a prevalence of whether or not somebody is neurodiverse, or actually whether they're going to need further support or not. So it's a really great piece of kit. We can provide personalised support via a coaching method through work or through study skills. We do, of course, in workplace coaching support with line managers as well. And the coaching journey makes sure that people go right through from an endpoint assessment success. Thanks, Martina. Next. There we go. So the different sorts of services that we provide, I've just captured them on this slide. They vary depending on where you are and what you can do with funding and all sorts of things, but we tend to build services that will suit a business or an apprenticeship scheme or a program. So it can be anything from doing a short positive assessment, which we talked about earlier. A positive assessment isn't a diagnosis, but it's where we are looking at somebody's innate strengths and talents and then helping them to decide what that looks like in terms of a career. It's a perfect piece of assessment kit for supporting people in career decisions and choices of direction. We also do full cognitive assessments, so that's diagnosis. We provide group coaching courses known as Memory Genius, individual one-to-one strategy coaching sessions. We can do upskilling for in-work support, and we also do webinars, like this, where we can get people together. We can build a bespoke program for people and actually run through workshops or just presentations, all sorts of things. Thanks, Martina. Next. Okay, the Genius Screener. So our Genius screening tool, it's free to use from our website, and everyone that logs into it will get a free report at the end. If you want to look at it later, it's geniusscreening.com, so it's quite easy to find. The assessment behind it is looking at the executive functions, and you can see those in the column in the middle. So we are looking at creative skills, problem solving, visual practical skills, communication, organization, time management, etc., etc. Once somebody's done their test, they then end up with a report behind it. The reports are completely free, no one pays anything. So the report that's attached will show them their strengths and their challenges. And then following on from that bar chart, there are some personalized strategies for the individual depending on their answers. So some of the things you saw on a previous slide where there were strategies about using certain pieces of equipment or, how to work or how to organize, there's some really great examples in there. So feel free to have a look at it later, go away and even have a go yourselves. I think you'll find it really, really fascinating, and I can guarantee you're bound to learn something new about yourself by doing it. Thanks, Martina. Next one. Okay, funding. I'm sure most of you know loads and loads of stuff about the funding problems for apprentices and getting money together to support them. I mentioned in the chat earlier, you can gain access to work funding for people, but it can delay support because it can be quite a slow process. I do know that since they've gone remote, they are moving quite quickly for people that have gone into placements or into new employment, which is great. They're tending to assess within about 2 weeks. With a really quick turnaround. It's interesting to note that all coaching and all training as part of Access to Work is 100% covered by that grant. So a business that they're working with won't contribute anything at all. In addition, if somebody applies for Access to Work within their first 6 weeks of employment or placement, everything is 100% covered. So that includes things like equipment, chairs, desks, all sorts of things. So if people do go through that route and it's quick, it's really great. It really supports small businesses as well. So when you've got people going into small businesses, it's a really, really useful piece of funding to go for. There is the additional learning needs fund of £150 per learner per month. That's a sort of a national standard. There's also an ability to make use of the earnings adjustment statements. Looking at EHCPs, there's an additional £1,000 employer and provider payment for apprentices aged 19 to 24 with an EHCP. Now that is a bit of a tricky one to get round, but actually it can be really useful and can cover the cost of things like diagnostic assessments when people are really struggling. So diagnostic assessments, as I'm sure you know, there's a long waiting list for them on the NHS. GPs won't necessarily help with anything in terms of diagnosis of the DISs, as Martina calls them, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, because they don't see it as a health condition. So it is a privileged service, unfortunately. It's a postcode lottery. So yeah, it's difficult. So getting funding for people to be able to have that assessment can be really, really useful for some people. So there's just some notes about applying there through the EHCP. In terms of support, so we provide bespoke support through us currently for several apprenticeship providers. So one of my colleagues is currently working with some apprentices through a company called JGA, and we do that through screening with them. We deliver 1.5 hours of one-to-one face-to-face coaching, which is currently on Zoom, but face-to-face coaching, followed by a support call or a telephone call to follow up on their strategies 2 weeks later. So they get one of those a month, and it fits in with that 150 quid. So that works really, really well. And then I've just put an image there of, sure you've seen that, the Apprenticeship Funding Rules and Guidance for Employers version 5. Lovely, thanks Martina. Next. Institute of Leadership and Management. Now we are really proud to work with the ILM in a module that we've developed specifically around neurodiversity. So lots of people can go through ILM certificates and do courses with the ILM. We have a specific endorsement that people can apply for and complete, which is around neurodiversity. So we are looking at their strengths and challenges, and actually they are getting a certificate to show how absolutely marvelously clever they are and how wonderful they are. So that is an additional thing. But it's looking at communicating their clear learning outcomes for each of the coaching programs, making sure that strategies can be evidenced so that they are evidencing their learning, record keeping external verification by the ILM, and it goes to endorsement or even a level 2 certificate in leadership and team skills. Thanks, Martina. That's it. And then we just want to end the presentation on our lovely CEO, Dr. Nancy Doyle. This is one of her strap lines, but it's something that we've adopted across the company. So inclusion is a moral, social, and economic imperative. We all lose when human potential is squandered.